Welcome back to Fix and Rex, a fan fiction podcast. I'm WMN. A big thank you to Lily Whitefield for allowing us to record 2 of her short stories from It Was a Graveyard Smash, her collection of Pauline Bridgerton drabbles and one-shots. Today's episode is a good representation of the diversity of stories in the collection. We bring you a fluffy and fun pumpkin patch modern AU and an angsty Regency zombie apocalypse. For more information about the collection, you can visit the episode description of this podcast. Pumpkin by Lily Whitefield. This story is rated for general audiences. Penelope waddled along in her brown plaid dress, unconsciously holding up her heavily pregnant stomach with her hands under her belly as she perused the aisles of available pumpkins, as though she were at a grocery shop and not in the middle of a muddy field in Wellies. Colin chuckled as she huffed and puffed her way along, pausing in front of a particularly small specimen with a long stem and a little curly stick with a few dried leaves coming off the top of it. "Colin, can you pick this one up for me? I want to see if it has any blemishes," she asked, pointing down at it as she tried to keep her heels from sinking too far down into the ground. "Of course, my love," he said, and squished his way to her side in his own rubber boots, bent over, and lifted the gourd up. None of them were connected to the main plant any longer, but, evidently, the farm liked to give its patrons the experience of making their choice, whilst suffering a lot of drudgery and a bit of mud from the English autumn rain. All the Londoners who bothered to drive out on a Saturday morning seemed to love it, if one were to judge by the staggering amount of people walking around. "Thank you, darling," she said, squinting at the orange flesh of the fruit, heavily scrutinizing it for any rotting or scuffed bits. "A pumpkin for my pumpkin," he smiled, holding the pumpkin and turning it in a circle so his wife could see the full view. Colin was looking at it too, and was about to make a comment about how perfect it looked, but then he saw her face. Pen's eyes grew wide, and her lips scrunched up a little bit. "You cannot be nice to me, Colin. I am pregnant enough that I will cry." "You're the one who asked me to pick up the pumpkin," he stated, confused but quite accustomed to the havoc her hormones wreaked on her emotions the past several months. "I meant you can't call me Pumpkin. That's just so... It's so..." Her voice cracked and squeaked as she choked over the words, trying to stop the tears from falling, but the dam was about to break. He needed to divert them. "I wasn't talking to you, Pen," Colin soothed her. "You wanted this one for the baby, right? I was calling her my pumpkin." More wrong words, because her face scrunched up and she sniffled. "Oh, stop it," she wailed, and tears began to fall. "No, that is too sweet, and you need to stop because my mascara is already running because the waterproof kind makes my eyes itch, and I'm sort of hungry too, but I cannot have you calling our unborn daughter Pumpkin." "Do you not like it?" he asked, trying to figure out exactly what about this interaction caused the overwhelming emotion. "I like it too much, which is why I'm crying." She struggled through her sobbing. Since the redirection tactic made it worse, and he truly hated seeing Penelope cry if he was the cause of it, even inadvertently, he tried to move the conversation along. "I'm sorry, darling. I didn't mean to make you cry. Is this pumpkin acceptable?" She sniffled, wiping the black gathering on her cheeks. "Yes, it's perfect. Please add it to the wagon." He placed the tiny pumpkin next to the other two, one quite short and round, and the other a bit tall and long, and Colin almost wanted to cry himself at the sight of their little doppelgangers. "I'm sure you're getting tired." She sighed. "It isn't so much that I'm tired as my feet, aching. "Can we pick up some food?" she asked hopefully, wiping at her nose. "We can find something on the way back," he said, and took her by the hand and kissed her forehead, carting their purchases over to the cashier to pay for them. Colin loaded everything up in the back seat of the car. He considered buckling up the little pumpkin into the car seat that was already fully set up, but he thought that might start Penelope's crying again and thought better of it. It's not that he didn't want to deal with the emotion, but he hated that she felt everything so strongly, and he didn't want to make it harder for her. She was already physically exhausted, and she did not need him to make her emotionally exhausted too. The drive back took an hour or so, with only a slight detour for some fast food. Colin parked on the street and gathered up the pumpkins into his arms, carrying them over to the door. He took a moment to arrange their little pumpkin family on their front steps, as Penelope inserted one chip after another into her mouth and watched him work. "Those look lovely with the wreath," she said through a mouthful of potato, gesturing to the ring of fake orange, red, and yellow leaves that encircled their brass door knocker. "They do. Very festive," he mumbled, artfully turning each pumpkin around until he was finally satisfied with their positioning. They were just by the front door and tucked into a corner. The Mummy and Daddy pumpkin behind the baby one. Colin grinned, stepping back to admire his handiwork. There we go. Ready for the baby to come home. He knew he shouldn't have said it the moment the words left his mouth, but he couldn't help himself. He watched as his wife's face started to scrunch up just before she once again started to cry. He wrapped an arm around her without thought. "I'm sorry," she apologized, pulling him close to cry into his sleeve. He laughed and rubbed her back. "It's all right, Pen. Do you want some ice cream?" "Yes, please." Agatha Bridgerton was born at the end of October, with a head full of curly, bright orange hair, just like her mother. They wrapped her up in a white blanket and placed a little yellow hat on her head, tiny ringlets sticking out around her neck and ears. As Pen watched from her hospital bed, the nurse placed Aggie in Colin's waiting arms. When he looked down at her squishy little face, her eyes closed, the first words he thought to say were, "Hi, pumpkin." Zombie by Lily Whitefield. This story is rated teen and up. For more information, please reference the tags in the episode description of this podcast. Colin wandered. Few thoughts ran through his head. Fewer made sense. He saw colors mostly. Red. Always red. Not a blood red, just a soft orange red. Hair. He could not see faces of those around him anymore. It was all gray. He could not feel his body, though it did move. He only knew because the scenery changed, from tall buildings to trees and grass and dirt. There were few people. They shuffled along as he did, mostly silent. No humans. He remembered some things from before. He had a large family with many brothers and sisters, though he could only see his mother when they all stood together in their great brick house in the city. He did not know what happened to them. He did not see them on the day. This happened to him when he went to White's one afternoon, in London. Someone came into the room. He did not see who it was, but there was a gasp and a squish, and there was screaming. And he fell asleep and woke up like this, still in the room, with many more like him near, just staring, numb. He was hungry. He wanted meat, but he did not know how to get it. He must have eaten before, but the only thing that appealed to him was the humans smelled good. They were not supposed to. He stayed away. The woman floated through his mind. Glimpses. Red and yellow and blue. Her form was short, but fuzzy. Yellow clothes, blue eyes, red hair. He wore tatters, and his shoes came off at some point, but he could not tell the difference. He tripped less without them. He did not know how long he wandered, or how far. Weeks, months. It grew colder and warm again, but he could only tell from the ice that formed and melted, and the buds that grew on the trees. He followed a road that felt familiar for so long. It was made of dirt, and he shuffled slowly, day and night, intent on some goal he could not conceive. He passed by tiny cottages, fields tilled with wheat, men and women that ran at the sight of him, hiding in their windows and behind locked doors. And one morning, he found a large home, white bricks and overgrown with ivy. So many humans yelled and made their way inside. There was a garden, and he thought he might smell roses. Someone did not go inside, despite others urging them to leave him be. He only saw red hair. Pen. She turned, and it was her. His lungs inhaled and exhaled. He thought he heard his heart beat and a bit of blood rush in his ears. She was just as he remembered her, his friend Penelope. "Colin?" her voice said. She sounded just like he remembered. He remembered. He walked closer, and she still held the sword. "Colin, I can't," she choked out. He grunted and stopped. He could smell her like flowers, and then he remembered what flowers were. She wore a dress, dirty and yellow, and he saw someone else standing in the doorway with a pistol. "Colin, don't come closer or I'll shoot," the man said. He sounded familiar. "He's so gray," Penelope said. "I know," the man replied. "I don't know if I can do this." "I know I can't." Pen shook her head, tears falling on her cheeks. Pen was sad. He mumbled, reaching a hand forward. They both stepped back and the pistol cocked. Colin did not move. That was his name. Colin. And the woman with red hair, she was Pen. "Anthony?" Pen breathed. "Did he just—" "He did," the man, Anthony, said. "Colin, who am I?" He searched his mind, and the word came to him. Brother. The gun fell to his side, and Pen's sword dropped to the ground. "Colin," she whimpered. "Pen," he said. "Do you remember?" "Pen. Friend." His mouth did not want to make words, but he did his best. When she started to cry, he thought his best was probably fine. "What do we do, Antony?" Pen asked. "I don't know," he breathed. "I don't think we can take him inside." "That seems dangerous," Pen agreed. "But can he grow stronger? More human?" "I have not seen such a thing," Antony said. "I did not believe it possible." "But he's speaking!" Pen cried. When tears started to fall on her cheeks, Colin stepped toward her. She did not react, but his brother stepped in front of her. "No," Antony stated. "Antony, watch his chest," Pen whispered. "He's breathing." "That's impossible." Indeed, Colin's chest was pushing air in and out of his lungs now. "Pen. Home." The two humans were both sobbing now. "He's coming inside," Pen stated. They did not touch him, but he followed Pen. He felt warm inside. There were more people waiting, and they must have been watching through the doors. When he did not pounce after a few moments, he heard someone ask, "Is that Colin?" "It is," Pen said quietly. "He's breathing." "But he looks like—" the oldest woman trailed off. "His mother." "Mama," he said, the word coming to him. His voice crackled, but he thought he sounded much the same as he did before. "He's bleeding," his sister whispered. "Eloise." "El," he said. Everyone seemed to start sobbing at once, still afraid to touch him. But he smiled, and he hoped it looked fine, because those muscles had not been stretched in God knows how long. "What do we do? How do we help?" his brother asked. "Benedict." "I do not know, but maybe first he needs time," Antony suggested. Colin could feel his stomach tightening. "Food." "Are you hungry? What would you like?" Pen asked. "Meat." "Bring him some of the roast," his mama ordered someone. As soon as the bite of beef touched his tongue, he could feel the numbness start to fade from his fingertips. He hummed as he chewed chunk after chunk, stuffing himself full. He sat on the floor as everyone watched him eat from a plate. And when he was finished and found his feet again, he felt balanced. "Are you well, Colin?" Pen asked, bravely taking several steps toward him. He reached for her hand, and she allowed him to take it. Home. He was home. Thank you for listening to the Fix and Rex podcast. Be sure to catch our next episode, an interview with pumpkin and zombie author Lily Whitefield. Until then, I'm WMN. Happy reading.